Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Caregiving Gen X Style. I am Steve Mullen.
And I am Jennifer Mullen.
One of the universal things about caregiving is the tendency for caregivers to eventually burn out.
What?
Anyone who has been taking care of an elderly loved one for any length of time has probably felt it. In this episode, we'll talk with a guest who will give us tips on how to identify burnout and avoid it. But first, Jennifer, how's your mom?
Mom's doing well. Let's see. Since last we recorded, I believe, right? We did have a slip to the floor.
We talked about that.
Did we talk about that?
Yes, we talked about that in the last episode because this episode's interview was supposed to be before that one, and we had to move it because of all that.
That's why we had to move it. Ooh, speaking of slight burnout, my brain is burned out sometimes.
Been juggling some things around because of that.
Well, so obviously I've already mentioned that, but I have sort of something funny to share, which is, of course, you know, we're doing in-home physical therapy right now, and speech therapy too, but the physical therapy in particular. And we have this really great physical therapist. And, you know, the thing is we know him because we've now had him for a couple of different cycles before. And last week, he was there for his visit, and we had Mom outside, and she was using her rollator, and she was walking in the parking lot in her apartment complex.
Good.
And, you know, her PT guy is walking with her. And I realized that Gagi is the master of distraction. The master of distraction, thinking that then maybe she can slow down with what she's supposed to be doing. So, for example, like he had a certain number of steps he wanted her to walk with her rollator, you know, out in the parking lot. And she would stop and she would comment about his tennis shoes, and she would comment about something on somebody's door at an apartment the next building down in the apartment complex. Except that, so what was particularly funny about it was Anthony, her PT guy, totally called her out on it. He, after like the third time she did it, he said, boy, he's like, you have the attention span of a toddler. And which of course I thought was funny. And I was like, oh, I'm not so sure that it's that so much as it is she's distracting you so that she can stop and take a breath for a moment. So we all got a little bit of a chuckle out of that. And I have continued to remind Gagi that Anthony has her number, and so no more distraction from her to him.
He's probably seen it all.
I'm sure he has. I have no doubt. So, Steve, how's your mom?
She's doing fine. I want to talk about wreaths.
Wreaths? Oh, wreaths. Oh.
So, longtime listeners will remember, I believe I've mentioned this before, when we moved my mother out of her house into assisted living, one of the problems we had was that this woman had about 20 door wreaths. And someone had built her a custom rack for these things in her garage. Yeah. And when we were basically deciding...
And your mom is, in fairness to your mom, right? It's not that she just puts the one on the front door. She puts them everywhere.
Oh, they go on the inside,
the interior doors,
the outdoor, her bedroom door.
Doors, yeah, everywhere. Yes. And so shockingly, even in her small assisted living apartment, she has figured out a way to hang 1, 2, at least 3, maybe 4 at a time.
Up to 4.
Yeah.
Up to 4.
Yeah.
But when we were moving her out of her house and deciding what was going to make its way, I, in my man brain, thought, well, we'll pick out 4 wreaths. Yeah. 1 each for a season. That was just silly of mine. And when I told her this, her eyes got real wide. I only get 4. So we compromised. We picked out a few more because she doesn't have that much storage space.
There's not much
These
storage.
are small apartments. Anybody whose parent or loved one is in assisted living, you know, these are small apartments.
And I refuse, even though we have plenty of storage space here.
Oh, no.
I refuse
No.
to start hoarding her items.
No, well, we're not
doing that.
We've already got like 3 boxes of Christmas decorations.
I know, and you know, that's fine, right? Like, that's fine.
Shoot.
But
so
I am not going to be party to your mom's hoarding tendencies.
Boy. So here's what's happened, though. We moved over, I think in the end it was 6. And I thought, that's plenty. She has slowly, meticulously, and consistently acquired new wreaths to the point where she has a very large pantry, which is the really nice thing about these apartments in this particular assisted living. They have a very, very big pantry.
Yeah. And she doesn't really need to use it for a ton of food.
No, because they feed her. It's
fed.
snack food mostly.
Yeah.
But that thing is starting to fill up with wreaths and door decorations, and I don't know what to do about it.
Well, and they're making them there too, right? Like some of the
that's
activities.
the other thing.
They're making these
she's
things.
got 3 or 4 of them that she made with her own bare hands, so I can't tell her to get rid of that.
You cannot.
So I don't know what to do about this. I mean, it's getting to the point, really, I think the only thing that's going to stop it is complete and utter lack of storage space, because that pantry is getting full.
Well, that, and
that may stop her.
I've offered, and we did determine that this worked well when we had to move your mom out of her home and had to pare down a lot of things. Sometimes it's a job better left for me.
It's true.
Than for you.
She listens to you way better than she listens to me.
Well, and same goes for Gagi
this
and
is
you.
True.
Yeah.
This is
funny
true.
how that works.
It is. It is funny.
Yep.
So let's get into our episode.
All right. Well, so burnout is defined as a state of severe physical, emotional, and mental exhaustion caused by prolonged excessive stress. So for most of us, we just know it when we see it. Burnout can reduce your productivity, and it can harm your relationships with others for sure. Not to mention the toll it takes on your own well-being. So Steve had the opportunity to record an interview. I was actually traveling for work. It was the interview that got moved because we had to go pick Mom up off the floor. And then the only time to reschedule it, I was out of town traveling for work. So with that, I am going to turn it over to you, Steve.
Our guest for this episode has advice for us. Annalee Kruger is a veteran senior care consultant who wrote a book called The Invisible Patient, which is all about how to keep from losing yourself in the process of caregiving. She's also the founder of a business called Care Right Incorporated. Annalee, welcome to Caregiving Gen X Style.
Thank you so much for having me as your guest.
So you've worked in the senior care industry for nearly 30 years. It's about as long as Jennifer and I have been married. Tell us about the path you took to where you are now, including writing that book.
Sure. So my grandparents actually lived with us on the farm when I was growing up as a kid, because back then in the day in the 70s, there wasn't home care, there wasn't independent living. So seniors either lived and died at home or they moved in with their kids, or they moved into a nursing home. And so I knew from a young age, and by the time I was in 3rd grade, I knew that I was going to be working with family, caregivers, and seniors, and those afflicted with dementia. And so that led me to becoming a social worker, admissions director, and ultimately executive director in CCRCs, continuing care retirement communities. And part of my job was always to do the tours of the care communities. And it was always a variation of the same problem. Adult kids got thrust into crisis mode with aging parents. Hospital says, here's a list of facilities. Go find one by noon tomorrow because we're discharging your loved one. And the kids had no idea what questions to ask, what to look for during the tour. Oh my goodness,
you're telling my story right there.
I'm telling everybody's story because this happens to millions of adult kids every day, or spouses every day. And so, if mom falls and she breaks her hip and she's a caregiver to dad who has Alzheimer's, the kids get thrust into caregiving and care decisions. And when I ask the kids, what conversations have you had with your parents about the what whens of aging? The answers were 99% of the time, we've never talked about any of this stuff. And then the other 1% was, Annalee, we tried to get information from mom and dad, like who's your financial advisor? What do you have in order? Or do you have your funeral arrangements taken care of? Who's your decision maker? But our parents gave us so much pushback that we quit trying to have these conversations. So lo and behold, here they are, mom's in the hospital. They're thrust into taking care of dad for the last week and they're exhausted. They're like, oh my God, he doesn't sleep at night. He doesn't know who we are. He fought us on medications and showers. And I was like, yeah, no wonder your mom got so burned out, right? And so every day, same problem. Adult kids or someone in the family gets thrust into care decisions and caregiving. They're ill prepared. They don't have their grab and go binder, so to speak, in order. They don't know accounts, passwords. And when dad loses, mental capacity, how are they going to pay bills if they don't know how to access accounts, what bank he uses, any of this stuff? Everybody's just, it's total chaos. So in 2011, I was like, well, I have 28 years of data points with families for the last almost 3 decades to know that they just don't think about planning ahead, or if they did try to plan ahead and have these conversations with their family, with their siblings or their parents, it often went sideways because it's hard for a family to have their own family meeting. So in 2011, I left corporate America and senior care or senior care as an employee, and started my own virtual family caregiver, senior care, dementia, and end of life virtual consultancy, because by 2011, families just didn't live near each other anymore. They didn't live down the street from each other. Kids lived all across the country. They're flying back and forth every time there's an issue with their parent, and it's just not sustainable. It affects their relationships at home with their parents, and certainly with their siblings, because as you probably know, not everybody just like, hey, what can I do to help? Right? It's always like,
no, well, that would be silly, wouldn't it?
You seem to have good control over this, so just keep us posted. Well, that doesn't go very far for a relationship. So, yeah, so I built Care Right in 2011 as a virtual consultancy. I'm still the leader in the industry because at the time, and still, people just, there aren't consultants out there doing this virtual crisis planning, aging planning, facilitating family meetings, helping families understand dementia, how to navigate senior care, assisted living, nursing home, memory care, and certainly family mediation. I've been doing virtual consultancy since 2011 because the market required it, because families don't live near each other anymore. And the only way I could facilitate their family meetings and help them understand why dad is acting the way he is and what their care options are was to use Skype, because that's what we had back then.
Yep.
So that's what I do, and that's what my team and I do. We work with families literally across the globe because families just don't live near each other, and they need help with understanding how to navigate family dynamics, family relationships, blended families, and what their care options are. And so that's how we help families literally across the country, except now we use Zoom.
And your company's called Care Right Incorporated.
Care Right Incorporated,
okay.
Yeah.
And you decided to write a book.
So I did, because I have had thousands of adult kids, because that's who reaches out to me, because they are mom and dad's assisted living. They're helping with meals, they're sending they're sending meals, they're dropping what they're doing because dad fell again, and what do we do now? And so I have had all of these adult kids say, look, Annalee, I love my parents, but this is just out of hand. Like their care needs are way more than I can manage. I'm an engineer, I'm not a nurse, and here I am flying there to wrap mom's legs because they have edema, and so they're like, we just want to be the son or the daughter. So they said, I wish there was a what to do with mom and dad as they get old book. And so I wrote one, and I call it the Invisible Patient: the emotional, financial, and physical toll on family caregivers. And the reason why it's so heavily focused on the family caregiver is because the family caregiver is the invisible patient. I'm often the only person who's asked a family, how are you holding up? This is a lot of work. It's a lot of time away from your business. It's a lot of time away from your own family. How are you holding up? And usually the adult kids or the primary caregiver, maybe it's a spouse or a sibling, says, oh my gosh, Annalee, you're the first person to even ask me how I'm doing. And so I wrote a book about family caregiving, the toll it takes, how to, different aspects of self-care, making sure that you have your own documents in order, making sure that, you've got time away for yourself, and putting systems in place. And the system is putting an aging plan in place for your parents so that you can get your life back on track. It's so sad to me that families end up almost hating each other or resenting each other so much through the last few years of their parents' lives. And it's primarily because they don't have enough supports in place, whether internally with their family or professional healthcare workers coming in to help them. And so, of course, they're going to get burned out.
It's going back to what you were saying about, the how are you doing? That's something we've talked about on our show before. For anybody who didn't hear us talking about that, if you are a secondary caregiver, and by that, I mean you are not the person who's doing most of the work, you're not local perhaps, talk to your primary caregiver, your parents' primary caregiver, and occasionally ask them how they're doing. Because Annalee's right, we don't get asked that very often. It's more of, how's mom doing? How's the assisted living? How's the nursing home? How's the whatever? People don't ask us how we're doing. And Annalee's absolutely right about that.
And you grit your teeth. You grit your teeth because they're always like, hey, how's your dad doing? Well, he's fine, but it's to my detriment, right? Because every time he falls or ends up in the hospital, I have to step away from my business. Or my husband was once supportive of me helping my dad, but now he's not, So this is the internal turmoil that caregivers feel. They're pulled in all of these different directions. And we tend to, as sons or daughters or spouses or caregivers, we just want everyone to be happy and safe. And so we bend over backwards, and it's not like our care recipient is our only responsibility, right? If you have a job, if you have a business, if you have a special needs child, if you have a sick spouse that you're also taking care of, and now dad had a stroke, you're like, oh my gosh, there's only so much of me to go around, and it's not enough. And I can share with you too, Steve, every caregiver, and myself included, because I'm in that cohort as well, we never feel like we're doing enough, or we kick ourselves. We feel like a real jerk when we lose our patience and we snap back, or, we're just tired or exhausted, or we've had to cancel another vacation because this happened to one of our parents or our care recipient. And that's where that resentment and anger settles in. And then you feel guilty for feeling that way. So it's a vicious cycle when we don't step back and just breathe and get some clarity on, okay, what we're doing is not working as a family, or me as a person. It's just not working taking care of someone whose needs are greater than what I can accommodate. And so it's hard to set boundaries, but we have to set boundaries. Otherwise, guess who gets lost in the shuffle? It's the caregiver.
Absolutely. We talked about it. I believe it was a dementia episode we did a couple of episodes ago. Mm-hmm. And, there was the saying that there are two patients. One is in the hospital bed and one's out in the hall. The one in the hall is going to break first.
Yeah.
But let's get into our episode topic, which is really all about kind of what we're talking about leading up to it, is burnout. It's almost a fact of life for caregivers, as you've been describing. And in your book, you identified some warning signs for us to look out for. What are they?
Warning signs for us to look out for as caregivers is, let's kind of break these down into different categories. So let's start with emotional. So emotional signs of compassion fatigue or caregiver burnout is when you just do not feel yourself anymore. Meaning you used to be happy-go-lucky, jolly, extroverted, wanted to get together with friends, had time to be able to go get your nails done or go to Bible study or get together for poker night or whatever that meant for you as a person. But then what happens as your loved one's needs continually increase and you get caught in what I call the caregiver snowball, then the next thing you know, your life truly is derailed, because now you're a full-time caregiver, but you're still balancing all of these other tasks and responsibilities that you have. And so taking a step back a second, it's one thing to take care of, if your mom breaks her hip in hopefully 6, 8, 10 weeks, she's back to baseline. But it's a whole different ballgame if you're taking care of someone with a chronic disease like MS, like ALS, like dementia or Parkinson's or any other type of long-term disease like that. It's very difficult because everybody's always like, Annalee, when is this going to end? Like, do I have to wait until my loved one passes away to get my life back on track? And the answer is no, you don't have to wait until they pass away. What a terrible existence, and feeling guilty for feeling that way. So that emotional turmoil of, I'm not doing enough, I should be doing more. What more can I do to sacrifice myself to meet the needs of the care recipient? But also, when you get thrust into caregiving, think about like if your parents are taking care of each other, or one of them has a dementia diagnosis and they're continually progressing, because that's what dementia does. And then your mom passes away from dementia. You're grieving your mom's loss as she went through the dementia journey. So that emotional kind of burnout. But also then when the death happens, you're grieving, but then you also become kind of like a confidant and social worker for your surviving parent, because you have to also feel like you also have to emotionally support them through their grief journey. So you get kind of a double whammy. You don't always get just the luxury of time to grieve your own loss, because you feel like you've got to support and advocate for your surviving parent as well. So how you know when you're burned out? This is how. When your friends and family say, gosh, you're getting kind of snappy, or we never see you anymore, or every time we ask you to go out and do something with us, you just automatically say no, or you look worn out, you look exhausted, you look burned out, or you're having health issues where you're not sleeping at night, or you want to sleep all of the time, or you now have anxiety where your whole schedule just feels so utterly overwhelming that you're like, oh my gosh, everybody needs something from me and I just can't do this anymore. So you feel this kind of loss of self through the journey if you don't have an aging plan or enough supports in place.
It's interesting. I've thought about this before, and stop me if I'm wrong here, because you've been at this for a lot longer than I have, at least in the industry. But part of the issue with caregiving, I think right now in this world in 2026, and I wouldn't say it's a problem, but people are living longer.
Yeah.
Technology is allowing them to live longer. Like, for instance, if my mother 50 years ago, if we were all transported 50 years ago, she would not be alive right now.
Mm-hmm.
She had a gastric bleed a couple of years ago that 50 years ago would have killed her. But they have technology now that they were able to take care of it for her. And it's wonderful that we have more time with her. And it's wonderful that she has more time on this earth. And she's in pretty good shape. She's in a wheelchair, but, all around, she's, mentally pretty sharp. Mm-hmm. But what becomes the problem for the caregiver is that slow progression downward. Mm-hmm. And we all, for a lot of people, we all know that's coming. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, 5 years from now, she may be in that slow progression downward. And that's when we get pummeled with caregiving.
Yeah.
And 50 years, like I said, 50 years ago, she wouldn't be here anymore. Mm-hmm. And a lot, you can point to a lot of people where there's improved medicines for this, that, and the other, where they're able to prolong life. And for a while, that's a good thing. But for a while, at the end of it, it's not really, I don't think, a good thing. And you hate to say that because you can't say it.
Yeah, but you have to think about quality of life. And, from the emotional perspective, when you talk about getting pummeled, that's exactly what happens. And it's like, just when you think you can catch your breath, then maybe your other parent or your in-law has a fall or a stroke, and you're just like, oh my gosh, And so you're always, from an emotional perspective, that anxiety is always just kind of there at the surface, and you're just waiting for the other shoe to drop, or you're waiting for that next crisis call. And pretty soon, and I hate to say this, but you asked about what does compassion fatigue and caregiver burnout look like? It looks like when your loved one's phone number pops up on your cell phone, you're like, dear God, now what happened? And who needs what from me now?
Oh, and really, sometimes it's really just anytime your phone rings.
Yes.
Oh, geez, what now?
Yes.
What are we going to have to deal with now?
Exactly. Or if your loved one is in a care facility, the care facilities are required to call the emergency contact person if there's a fall, if there's a medication change, if there's a weight loss, if there's any kind of change, significant change, they're required to call the family. And so even when I was working in long-term care and I was making those phone calls, that you could just hear when they answer they answer with a sigh.
Oh, I was picturing it in my head. It's, oh, what? Oh,
because
no.
the facility never calls because they're like, hey, your mom went to the birthday party and loved the chocolate cake. No, it's like your mom fell and we're sending her to the ER and she's going to the hospital, right?
It's funny what my mother's assisted living does. And I think she's been in 2 assisted living. And I think they both did it. It's probably common practice is if they do call me for something that isn't an emergency, the first thing when I pick up the phone, I say, hello. They say, your mother's fine.
Yes.
But we're calling because X, which I do appreciate. I really do appreciate that. They get that out there real quick.
Yeah, because they know, the smart ones know that they're like, oh gosh, the facility is calling now. What happened?
But, let's break down a couple of the warning signs, anger and resentment. And I think we are probably all as caregivers familiar with this.
Yeah.
Why do you think they're so common?
Well, it's because usually the caregiver doesn't have enough supports in place, or they're not supported by their own family. If you have siblings, the assumption seems to be that if you have siblings that, we'll just divide and conquer with mom and dad. Well, that doesn't always happen.
It does not.
So the resentment can happen easily because you're like, wow, sister, or wow, brother, I can't believe you're not stepping up to the plate. You know how exhausting mom and dad are, or dad had a hospital stay and now he has 7 follow-up doctor's appointments and no one's offering to help schedule those or take them to their appointments, or at least join virtually and have your dad call you on the cell phone when the doctor comes. So there's kind of an assumption sometimes that, well, my siblings will help out. Well, that doesn't always happen. Or what if you're in a blended family and you don't even know really your mom's husband's kids because they got married later in life and now one of the parents had a stroke and you're like, well, I guess this is how we're going to meet is at the hospital, right? Mm-hmm. And so that resentment happens pretty easily, and it's across the board because even like I said, even the most supportive, loving spouse eventually will say, look, I love your parents or I love your dad, but you need to figure out what you're going to do with him because now his needs are affecting our marriage. You're not present for our marriage. You don't have emotional bandwidth for our marriage, or, you missed our kids' own soccer games the last few weeks because of your dad. And, so there's resentment literally across the board. And even from a workforce perspective, you can only play what I say, the caregiver card for so long before your colleagues are like, okay, look, I'm sorry that your dad had a stroke, or I'm sorry that you're in this dementia journey, but we're not going to keep lifting the load for you and covering for you or doing your work for you while you're gone for periods of time. And so that again spirals that caregiver down into isolation and depression and anxiety because they're not feeling heard. They're not feeling validated. They're not being supported by those who kind of should be supporting them and loving them. And a lot of it boils down to, again, not having an aging plan where there's enough supports and enough care in place. And you have a plan so that it's like, okay, what do I want to keep doing as a caregiver? What do I actually like to do? Maybe you like to cook and send meals, or maybe you don't mind Amazon shopping and having supplies sent to your parent. But at some point, the caregiver, when they don't have enough support in place and they don't have the opportunity to do self-care, they get so burned out that sometimes they'll just say, you know what, I've had enough. I've been doing this for 8 years. You guys take care of mom and dad because I've had enough. I'm done. And we don't want that. We don't ever want that to happen because then those relationships are kind of scarred for life. If I can catch families in the infancy stages of burnout, of resentment, of family feuding, they have much better outcomes because it's in the infancy stages, right? But when we're working with families they're just so utterly fried or they made the decision of, because they were in crisis, well, Mom and Dad, your house isn't senior safe. It's not set up for you. You have Parkinson's, and your bedroom's on the second floor, and your laundry's in the basement. So I guess you're going to have to move in with us, and it's just temporary. Well, guess what? A year later, it's not temporary anymore, and Parkinson's progressed, and now the care needs exceed what the family can do safely on their own. And so again, that's where that resentment takes in. Or if you're the spouse, you're like, I didn't retire to take care of my wife who just had a stroke or got diagnosed with Parkinson's or early onset dementia. So that resentment happens easily, quickly, and before you know it, you're burned out and you have compassion fatigue where you're like, well, I guess you fell. I told you to bring your walker, So you get kind of to the point where you're kind of desensitized, and then you feel guilty for feeling that way.
The resentment, you were talking a lot about that. And I do think that's universal with people. And I think what it is, and I know we've talked about this on the show at least a little bit, it's a syndrome I call some people have choices. Mm-hmm. And it's whether you're talking about a sibling who may not be helping as much as you think they should, or even, your friends that aren't in this same world that you are.
Yeah.
You look at them and you say, oh, you have the choice tomorrow whether you get to go to the movies or go to your kid's soccer game or just sit around the house and, watch stupid TV shows all day.
Yeah.
We don't have choices. We have to go do the caregiving thing when we have to go do the caregiving thing. And that, I think, at least with me, sometimes that's the source of my resentment, is just not having the choices. And I will be the first to say, right now, I have it pretty easy. Mom's in assisted living and she's in pretty good shape. That's not always the case.
Right.
But, well, let's talk about the physical signs of burnout. Because, I think of it as mental. What are the physical signs?
Physical signs is your body will tell you, and you have to listen to it. But we're caregivers, so we're so busy and we always put ourselves last. But physical signs of caregiver burnout are fatigue, exhaustion, aches and pains, or maybe you have your own chronic condition. You have fatigue syndrome or any other health issue, and it gets worse, right? When you're stressed out. Or maybe you have cancer or MS. And so the physical signs of burnout are often, blood pressure issues, ulcers, stomach issues, aches, pains, a worsening condition that you already have. Some people get skin infections, eczema can get worse or flare up. So rheumatoid arthritis can flare up again, so whatever you already have going on with you can get worse when you're burned out because your immune system is shot, especially when you're perpetually a caregiver and you're not supported enough and your parents or your loved one doesn't have enough professional care coming in. Physically, you're going to get burned out. We know that physically, spouses tend to get back injuries or they fall trying to take care. If Ethel is 80 and Marvin, her husband, is 85 and little Ethel is 100 pounds soaking wet and she's trying to bathe Marvin and he's slippery, if he starts falling, she's going to go down too, right? And so now you have two parents with two broken hips. And now what are you going to do? So the physical signs of burnout are physical injuries, of course, but also your lab work can be, your blood work can be off, your adrenals, especially women, check your adrenals, get your hormone levels checked. And we're going to talk about perimenopause, because guess what happens usually to women in their 40s or 50s or 60s? Their own bodies and hormones are changing. They're looking at their own, their own retirement potentially and their own family issues. And now they have, they're in perimenopause or menopause where their hormones are kind of out of whack a little bit. And now you have to be a caregiver. And so you're already got a couple whammies against you. And it's just that time of life where it gets really hard really quickly. Or if you're a woman and you stayed home from, working and raised kids, You might just now finally be getting traction in the workforce or in your career or in your business. And now mom had a stroke and she's a caregiver to dad with dementia. So now what are you going to do? So those can be indicators of physical burnout. Plus, we know that as far as burnout, if you don't listen to your body, the warning signs of stress are often there. Anxiety, heart palpitations, poor sleep, poor appetite or change in appetite. And we know that caregivers over the age of 60 have a 65% mortality rate if they're a caregiver because of the toll on the caregiver, and they have a 65% mortality rate.
Wow.
So adult kids should never be, they always are, but they should never be surprised if mom is the primary caregiver to dad who has Alzheimer's or Parkinson's or any other chronic condition like that, and mom dies first. They should never be surprised by that, but they always are. And so that's why I talk so much about caregiver burnout, caregiver support, making sure that you do take time and set boundaries. And when you tell a burned out caregiver, make sure you take time for yourself, I can tell you they will just cut you in half with laser eyes, because they're like, and when am I supposed to do that? Because
that's the choice portion thing that I was just talking about. We don't have that choice sometimes.
That's exactly right. And so when non-seasoned people who mean well say, well, make sure you take care of yourself, that doesn't land well, because they're like, how am I supposed to do that? I'm up to my eyeballs at work. I'm up to my eyeballs with my own family, and I'm up to my eyeballs with, mom and dad's care or a spouse's care. And so self-care can mean a lot of different things. Self-care, because I know you've done a lot of different podcasts on what it is.
We have, and I'm quite sure our listeners hear it and roll their eyes when we talk about it.
I'm
quite sure they do.
Because I'm a caregiver, and I know lots of nice people are like, Annalee, make sure you take care of yourself. And I'm like, yeah, whatever, just shut up. Right?
And I know our listeners do that, I'm sure, because sometimes I'm talking about it and I'm rolling my eyes like, when do you have time for that? But you got to do it.
You do have to do it. It's hard to set boundaries, but you do have to set boundaries, especially if you've never really set boundaries in your life with anyone. But now is the time to start feeling comfortable setting boundaries. Or if your parent, we're just going to assume that it's your parent, or if your spouse doesn't talk to you very nicely when you're taking care of them, you can say, you know what? I'm here to help you. This doesn't seem like it's a good day for you. This works really well if they're in a care facility. But, if they're always griping at you, or, oh, I hate living here, or whatever, you can say, I'm really sorry, Dad, that this is a bad day for you. I'll come back next week and maybe you'll be, having a better day. And if your parent doesn't have any cognitive issues, if you keep doing that 3 or 4 times, then they'll be like, oh, wait, she didn't come visit me just to have me complain about how much I hate it here. So that's an example. But when you talk also about self-care, part of self-care is getting your own documents in order so that you don't leave yourself vulnerable or your family exposed because you don't have your living will, you don't have your power of attorney or long-term care insurance, or you didn't communicate to those who are going to have to step in potentially to help you someday. You didn't educate them on, okay, well, these are the professionals that I work with. Here's my financial advisor. Here's my attorney. Here's my CPA. Here's which bills come out of which account. Here's my bank. So getting yourself prepared and organized is going to also be helpful. And people might be going, how is that self-care? Because guess what? If you have your own medical issue because you ignored the signs of caregiver burnout and now you had a stroke or a heart attack, guess what that's going to do to you and the rest of your family? So self-care is getting your own documents in order with like your grab and go binder, like what I created way back in 2011, because families didn't have any idea of what their own parents had in order. Self-care is also understanding your own limits and accepting that. Maybe you can only spare 2 hours a week to help take care of a parent, there's nothing wrong with that. And if they need more than the 2 hours that you can spare, then they're going to have to pay a professional, or they're going to have to, figure out a different plan. And that's why I keep going back to an aging plan. That's why I started Care Right in the first place, is there's no reason for families to get so derailed and so burned out if we can start talking about the what whens of aging now and understand dementia and understand these chronic diseases, so that families are not blindsided when dad starts wandering out of the house or when he leaves the stove on. And so part of that self-care is putting that aging plan in place and setting the boundaries. And when you have date night with your spouse or your partner, you shut the phone off. And I guess whatever happens during that 6-8 hours or whatever it is you're going to do, I guess whatever happens, happens. If there's an emergency, your loved one will go to the ER.
I suspect there are a lot of caregivers out there rolling their eyes right this moment.
I'm sure they are.
Yeah, I'm not sure that people are going to do that, and I'm not sure I would be able to do it. That's hard. A tough one. And even though I know, and Jennifer says this to me, if something happens to your mother, they will get her to the ER.
That's right.
That's not so much the case with Jennifer's mother, who lives independently. Mm-hmm. We really can't do that with her.
Yep.
So it's a tough one, but basically you're saying, one of the best things you can do is prepare in advance and have those plans in place, so you know what to do and you don't have to run around like an idiot trying to figure out what to do.
Well, it's chaotic because, especially if you don't live where your parents live, if your parents live in Tucson, Arizona, but you're not from there. And so when you get that crisis call that dad had a stroke and he's the caregiver to mom with, dementia, kids, they have no idea who providers are. They don't know what home care is. They don't know any of the lingo for healthcare. And so they're always surprised because they're like, oh my gosh, we didn't know that home care, there was a shortage of workers. And so who's going to take care of mom if the home care companies in the area don't have enough staff to fill all the shifts? Or we didn't realize that mom and dad, because they live in northern Wisconsin and it's really rural, it never occurred to us that there's not a home care company on every block, or that the facilities might have a 5-year waiting list, or that mom needs memory care and dad needs skilled nursing, and where they live, there aren't any options for them to be together. And so I know that people are like, oh, this sounds like work and not self-care. But believe me, if you don't know the lay of the land and have these conversations or put your own aging plan in place, at some point you're going to be forced into it. So doesn't it make more sense to do it sooner rather than later? As far as the boundaries, because I used to roll my eyes too. I'm like, boundaries, whatever. But I have to tell you, when I got thrust into caregiving for the last 9-10 years, full-time plus running my business.
Of course.
I learned because I could feel that resentment really kicking in and setting in there pretty deep. And so I had to learn to set boundaries and say, look, when I'm working during the day, if you are having a medical issue, you need to call 911, because I can't step away from my business. I can't just drop what I'm doing every time there's a problem. And so, you feel terrible, trust me, terrible about doing that. But if you don't, your relationship is going to be so impaired and so strained. And then you're going to feel terrible because you're like, God, I am a terrible daughter because I couldn't be there for my parent. Well, you can only be sliced and diced in so many sections. And then pretty soon your own health is going to be at risk. And often, if you're the caregiver, you are the glue holding everything together. So even though you might be rolling your eyes, this does make sense, right? An aging plan, understanding the disease that your loved one has, actually scheduling time on your calendar and safeguarding it and say, look, brother, or look, sister, I need you to step in for this period of time because I'm going to be on vacation, or putting your loved one in respite care while you're gone so that you know that they're at least in a facility and they're being taken care of while you can get away for 2 or 3 weeks or have your own back surgery or rotator cuff surgery.
Okay, so where can people find your book?
So they can find my book on Amazon, or they can order it directly through me through the book's website, invisiblepatientbook.com.
All right, we'll put a link to that in our show notes. Annalee Kruger, author and founder of Care Right Incorporated. Thanks for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it too.
Thank you so much to everyone for listening to this episode. If you'd like to get in touch with us, as always, we have ways to do it. You can email us at caregivinggenxstyle@gmail.com. You can also leave us a text or a voicemail. Please send us your voicemails, 804-723-1221. You can find us on Twitter. We don't post there very much, but you can find us there. Our handle is @GenXCaregiving. We're also on Facebook. Please go like our Facebook page. You can find us by going to the show notes for this episode and clicking on the link. One final thing. We love when people review this podcast. It helps others when you go into Apple or elsewhere to give a review for us. It helps others find us. So if you have a moment, please go and leave us a review. We'd really appreciate it. We hope to hear from you soon. Have a great day.
Good night, everyone.